In this video, I'm going to show you several astonishing lost maps of ancient Africa and the Sahara, which blew me away, as what's shown on these maps is simply not supposed to be possible, and the implications of which are absolutely enormous, as you'll see by the end of this video. And it's hard to know which map to show you first, so let me start by asking, why on earth does a map that was created closer to 500 years ago, and which also happens to be one of the world's first ever maps to depict the entire continent of Africa as a whole, clearly illustrate lakes, rivers, and even a dense forest the size of Texas in the middle of the Sahara Desert, which, needless to say, is obviously far different than the vast, barren, continental-sized desert that we all know it for today. And if you think it's odd to see lakes, rivers, and lush vegetation in the Sahara, wait until I show you what else is hiding on this map later in the video. But first, it must be mentioned that considering that this map was created by Sebastian Münster, who has been said to be one of the most influential cartographers of the 16th century, as he was the first person to print separate maps for each continent around the world, including not only of Africa, but that of Europe, North and South America, which is rather fascinating. And he even produced the first ever printed map of Asia. So it would seem to me that a mapmaker as sophisticated and acclaimed as Sebastian Münster would have had some reason to explicitly detail the Sahara with a diverse network of lakes, rivers, forests, instead of the inhospitable, sandy desert place that it is today. And this caused me to go down the so-called rabbit hole in search of the oldest maps of Africa, and I could not believe just how many show the Sahara saturated with lakes, rivers, and even numerous cities and settlements scattered throughout the region. Whether it be this striking map created in 1482 by German printer Leonhard Holl, and upon closer inspection, you can see not only rivers and lakes, but numerous cities blanketing the entire region. Again, what on earth is all of this doing in the middle of the Sahara on a 500-year-old map? In fact, there are others which show walled cities and even castles throughout the region as well. What you're looking at here is the Catalan Atlas, a medieval world map from the year 1375 that was once within the Royal Library of France. And by the way, that is Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire, the richest man ever known to have existed in all of human history. In fact, nearly twice as wealthy as Elon Musk. But that aside, the very nature of all these cities in the middle of the Sahara, annotated on a map that is nearly 650 years old, is intriguing to say the least. Which brings me to an incredibly astonishing world map created by Italian cartographer Fra Mauro in the year 1450. First, observe that it is orientated south, so let me flip it over so you can more easily get your bearings on the direction Africa is facing. But from here, let's again flip it back and observe the Sahara from the original southerly facing, so you can distinctly see that most of the Sahara is absolutely teeming with cities. Where did all of these civilizations go? I have to say that I find this map to be quite interesting, and I will come back to it later in this video as there is a significant detail that must be discussed. But you must first understand that there is no shortage of these vintage maps of Africa and the Sahara. Whether it be this one from the year 1578 by renowned Flemish cartographer Gerardus Mercator, which is based on the work of Ptolemy, and as you can clearly see, annotates a river network traveling horizontally, or east and west, through the Sahara. Or take this map created by Italian engraver Fernando Bertelli in 1565, which blatantly shows three massive lakes connected by a river system. In fact, if you go back nearly 6 decades earlier, you'll find something quite thought-provoking, which is this massive world map created in the year 1507 by the prominent German cartographer Martin Waldseemüller, who, by the way, is the guy that gave the so-called New World the name America, which originates from this very map, and upon a closer inspection, clearly shows the Sahara Desert buzzing with cities that follow along a system of rivers and lakes, again, on a map that was created more than 500 years ago. I think I'm starting to notice a pattern here. And if what I've showed you so far isn't already strange enough, this is where things get even more interesting and will continue to escalate through the rest of the video. Now let me first say that I am not suggesting that these various 500- and 600-year-old maps are actually depicting the Sahara with lakes, rivers, and forests at that time, but rather that these maps are evidence of a lost ancient knowledge of what the Sahara was like between 5 and possibly even more than 10,000 years ago, and here's how you know. As I have of course shared in multiple prior videos, scientists have only just learned within the last decade, through modern scientific studies, that the Sahara Desert was green and tropical as recently as 5,000 and 6,000 years ago, literally tens of thousands of years more recently than previously thought, per the African humid period. A truly fascinating fact that surprises most people when they hear it for the first time, as most all of us were taught that the Sahara Desert was millions of years old. Which brings us to the thought-provoking question, which is, why is there a map created in the year 1502 literally showing a green Sahara? This is a Portuguese world map called the Contino Planisphere, named after Alberto Contino, and smuggled to Italy from Portugal well over 500 years ago. Honestly, how have I never seen or heard of this map before? And why on earth does it so blatantly display the Sahara with such a lush tropical environment? And if you look closely, you can clearly see the details of trees and vegetation within. And again, more than 5,000 years after a green Sahara was last known to exist, which raises significant questions with unbelievably profound scientific and academic implications involving the topic of climate history when you consider that the mainstream scientific understanding today is that these ecological features, including lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forests, last existed in the Sahara as far back as 5,000 to 11,000 years ago, according to the most recent mainstream scientific sources available. And if that doesn't get you thinking, here is something that may blow your mind, which is the discovery of the world's largest freshwater lake ever known to exist was also located in the middle of the Sahara and dates back 5,000 years and is referred to as Mega Lake Chad, which I have touched on in prior videos. And real quick, to put its immense size into perspective, the total surface area of all the North American Great Lakes combined equates to approximately 94,000 square miles of aggregate surface area, whereas Lake Chad equated to approximately 150,000 square miles of surface area all by itself. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Besides the fact that this lake mysteriously dried up in a matter of just a few hundred years, this mega lake existed 5,000 to 15,000 years ago. Now, hold that thought and let's revisit a couple maps that I just showed you moments ago, including the 1565 map of Fernando Bertelli, as well as the 1482 map of Leinhard Hull, and tell me that these two maps do not depict this lake. Just consider the general region of Lake Chad's location, which is in modern-day country of Chad, and compare it to these old maps. And now consider this important detail, which is that Mega Lake Chad was actually the largest of 4 paleo lakes in the Sahara. Is that not what this map is showing, and inexplicably 500 years prior to its discovery in modern times? And if that isn't interesting enough, consider what I discussed moments ago related to the various maps I just showed you that clearly annotate a network of rivers traversing east and west through the middle of the Sahara, along with those areas teeming with civilizations, including obvious cities and settlements everywhere in between. Well, isn't it curious that a modern scientific study from within just the last decade identified a paleo river system of 3 large rivers that once existed in the middle of the Sahara and would have likely have supported ancient human migration routes from 5,000 to 11,000 years ago. So either rivers existed 500 years ago in the Sahara, or the ancients passed down knowledge of the Sahara's climate from several thousand years ago. And with that said, it must be mentioned that maps showing rivers in the Sahara go back much further than just 500 and 600 years ago, as some of these maps are actually based on the work of Ptolemy, who created this map in the year 150 AD, closer to 2,000 years ago. Did this river exist at that time, or was Ptolemy passing down ancient knowledge from even older source maps that may have existed or been created thousands of years before his time? Because let's not forget that that's exactly how the Piri-Reis map of 1513 came into existence, as it was comprised of more than 20 source maps from around the world, and has become one of the most highly debated maps in existence, as many believe that it shows the coastline of Antarctica some 300 years before Antarctica's alleged discovery in the year 1820. However, many will adamantly say that this map is simply showing the coastline of the southernmost point of South America. This is something that I will be discussing at length in my next video, but based on the modern scientific studies, it seems to me that these various 500-year-old maps are actually based on older source maps from 5 to possibly even more than 10,000 years ago, when the Sahara was literally a green tropical environment. Because consider the Fra Mauro map of 1450 that I discussed earlier, and notice that it specifically details the middle of the Sahara as a desert at that time, which I would say is supportive evidence that the Green Sahara, along with the rivers and lakes, were long since gone when this map was created 500 plus years ago, and more likely suggests that these various maps are showcasing lost ancient knowledge of the Sahara from thousands of years prior. And if all of this isn't compelling enough, what I'm about to show you now is what I consider to be the proverbial nail in the coffin, which overwhelmingly indicates the existence of this lost ancient knowledge, which is simply not supposed to be possible. Consider the 1452 map of Sebastian Münster and refocus your attention away from the rivers, lakes, and forest, and observe what is shown in the Western Sahara and in the same geographical location of the Richat structure, or the Eye of the Sahara as it's more commonly called. A spectacular geological feature unlike any other on Earth, and perhaps one of the most mysterious and bizarre structures in the world, which I have of course discussed at length on this channel as I have compared its striking similarities to the legend of the lost city of Atlantis. But never mind the topic of Atlantis, and consider one thing and one thing only for a moment, which is the question as to whether this map is showing the Richat while consumed with water. In fact, here is a similar map created by Heinrich Bunting in the year 1581, which seemingly shows a river leading from the Atlas Mountains in North Africa and consuming the Richat with water. But if that's not compelling enough, take a look at this other map of Northern Africa while under the rule of the Roman Empire, which again seemingly details a river originating from the Atlas Mountains and appears to be arguably consume the Richat structure with water based on its circular nature and location, and also depicts it flowing out to the Atlantic Ocean. And this is where it gets wild, because we now know through recent scientific studies that the ancient Tamanrasset River flowed from the Atlas Mountains and widened some 500 kilometers, or just over 300 miles, all the way to the Atlantic, and directly in the path of the Eye of the Sahara as far back as 11,700 years ago, before it mysteriously dried up approximately 5,000 years ago. And when you consider an unbelievably significant detail, which I shared in a recent video, which is that a modern study identified the existence of aquatic life in the Richat structure, which included mollusks, and that date between 7,700 and 15,000 years ago. So think about that. These maps may literally be depicting ancient knowledge dating as far back as closer to 8,000 years ago, because the Richat did indeed have water in it at that time, and it seems to me that these two maps are detailing the extinct Tamanrasset River, which once flowed through this exact location. So how and why is it seemingly shown on these maps 5,000 years after? And real quick, while I'm at it, does the nearly 700-year-old Catalan Atlas map also show the circular Richat structure with water flowing into it from the Atlas Mountains? Perhaps, as that is hard to say either way, and by the way, going back to the Piri-Reis map of 1513, most discussion about it is focused entirely on whether it depicts the coastline of Antarctica. However, when you examine this map, you realize that it does show a small portion of the Sahara, which may also show the Richat with water in it, based on the circular nature of this feature you see here, and seemingly with a settlement in the middle, which is in the same general location of the Richat. That is certainly debatable, and maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but it is something interesting and worthy of mention, as it is yet again on another 500-plus-year-old map. But if you want to see a particularly fascinating detail to pond over that I would consider to be the epitome of bizarre, let's go back to the Münster map of 1452 and notice what is illustrated here. What on earth is a giant, white, naked, one-eyed cyclops creature doing in the middle of what is in modern-day Nigeria and Cameroon? When I first saw this, I was like, what is that? But it's most likely that several hundred years ago, European explorers came across an elephant skull for the first time, and their fears and imaginations went wild. And to be fair, if you had no prior knowledge of the existence of elephants and their unique trunks, it wouldn't be hard to assume this was a giant one-eyed creature. And it is also believed to be the origin of the ancient Greek mythology for Cyclops. But I digress, as I have to say that the only thing stranger than all the various maps that I've shared with you throughout this video is the fact that so few people have ever even seen or heard of them before. But the very fact that virtually none of them are taught in school and that their contents are not included in modern debates involving Earth's climatical history, it seems to me that their absence in these conversations is highly unfortunate. Honestly, I think these maps stand to upend much of the modern discussion of our climate, which has sadly become highly political in recent times. I mean, where did all of the rivers, lakes, forests, and cities in the middle of the Sahara go? Definitely leave a comment and share your thoughts on everything that's been discussed in this video. Are these maps showing evidence of a lost ancient knowledge that from several thousand years earlier involving Earth's climatical history? Or is it possible that the Sahara Desert's climate was vastly different some 500 and 600 years ago? Definitely something fun to think about. But with all that said, my name is Jimmy Corsetti. My channel is called Bright Insight. Hit the like button and subscribe. And stay tuned for my next video, which I suspect is going to be incredibly thought-provoking for many people. All that said, take care, everyone.